You could start with a whole lot less, but this is just a simple model of $20 items to make a profit of only $1,000. At this point, why not just get a job? So we recently got a video request for the Resale Brothers on how to make an extra $1,000 a month reselling on eBay. Shoutouts to Jules and Crime. Thanks for the request. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Analyzing the Advice, where we critique the advice and not the advisor. So you guys ready? Let's get into it.
All right, guys, and now here we are. We're going to talk about the methods. And now when we say methods, we're talking about the amount of items you have to list and you have to sell for a certain profit margin to be able to reach that $1,000 a month. The first sort of method that we suggest that people try to use is you can sell 100 items for $10.
Is anybody else kind of disappointed? Because when he said 5 different ways, I was thinking of nuanced ways, creative ways within the reseller that might even change my mind about reselling. This at a glance just looks like 5 different ways to slice a cake. I mean, that's what it looks like.
Each, $10 profit each. That's very doable for a lot of people, and it's something that's not crazy difficult. And finding the items and also listing the items and being able to ship out that amount is pretty easy, and
especially for the part-timer.
Yeah, it's not something that's going to be overwhelming for you. The math that we did,
we assumed a 50% sell-through rate.
So
it's a realistic way to get to these numbers.
For $10 profits, 50% sell-through rate is, like I said, something that's very easy to do. So the target, and granted, it's not going to be right off the bat. You're not going to list your first 7 things and be like, hey, they all sold in an instant and we made $100 or $10 profit on each one. That's not going to happen. You have to build up for a little bit, but like I said, you have to sell 100 items for $10 profit. It's going to take about
That's wild, right? Like, taking a step back as a entrepreneur, right? Your job is to make the best use of your money and time, the way you invest, the way you spot problems, the way you optimize things. So for him to say that, you're going to list stuff and they're definitely not all going to sell, is kind of wild in that kind of the thinking that, like, you already know ahead of time that you're spending all this time sourcing and listing and they're not going to sell. The question is, what do you do with the items that don't sell? So my biggest concern right now, looking at these numbers, is what do you do with the items that didn't sell? If you look at the first one, it says sell 100 items with a profit of $10. Okay, cool. All you need to do is list 7 items per day. After 30 days, that's 210 items, right? So after 100 items have sold, you've made the monthly goal of $1,000, because divided by $10 of 100 items, that's $1,000. I disagree. What happens to the rest of your goods that didn't sell? What happens to the money that was tied up in the goods that you didn't sell? Because remember, you didn't buy 100 items and they all sold. He even specifically said that they will not all sell. The sell-through rate is 50%. That means the other 50% didn't sell. In this particular case, you're talking about 100 items sold over 210 items. So that's not even 50%. So that means you have something like, 53 point something percent that did not sell. Your money is still tied up in there, and that eats towards your cost. So depending on how much you sourced it for, so what your margins are going to be so that they equal $10 profit, you could easily be in the hole. You could be in the red if, let's say you buy something that's, I don't know, maybe like 80 cents on the dollar, anywhere between 50 to 80 cents on the dollar. You'd definitely be in the hole with this kind of strategy. So I'm not too sure if this is a way of making $1,000, because after you sold your first 100 items, you didn't make $1,000 yet. You might still be owing money.
Listing goal of 7 items per day.
We're going to run these numbers.
So your daily sales goal is
3.5.
3.5.
3.3.
Yeah, about 3,
Right.
sometimes 4. It's an average of what sells a day. So like I said, something that's really easy to ship. 7 things listing a day is really easy. So that is the first kind of method that is ideal, we think.
Okay, so out of the 7 items, 3 to 4 sell every day. What happens to the 4 to 3 that didn't sell every single day? You're waiting for him to sell, but only 50% is calculated as made $1,000, right? Because you're only considering that once you sold 100 of them, there, I made my $1,000. I disagree. Your money is still tied up in the cost of goods, and it's very possible that you paid way more than what you earned back. And even if you earned it back, you'd probably be like either a little in the green or deeply in the red.
To start off, being able to make
Probably
$10 profit.
Probably the
It's
easiest.
definitely
is
not plus
find 100
$1,000 for 100 items sold.
The bottleneck to all this, we think, is not really the pictures, and it's not really the shipping. People don't like doing that. It's finding the amount of items to reach 100 items with a $10 profit.
The number 2.
Why is that the bottleneck?
This is also pretty doable. 50 items.
The bottleneck is the sourcing part.
So 50 items that make a $20 profit.
The sourcing part is an anecdotal thing, right? Because I don't know, you might have an uncle with a warehouse of like all sorts of wholesale things that he does. So you just grab a couple and then eBay them on the side. You might have, you know, one of those, I got a guy who knows a guy kind of deal, and then you're able to get stuff. Sourcing is an anecdotal thing, right? Where every single one of us sources differently. I personally use sourcing agents. I go to trade shows. I speak to factories directly, right? So my sourcing experience is completely different than your sourcing experience. But the point is, there's definitely people who have made connections with wholesalers, and there are definitely people who have more shops in their area because they live in a, you know, more metro area than a rural area. It's, you know, granted, guys, open disclosure, I've never done reselling before, but, you know, I know what reselling is in like 5 minutes because what I do is far more advanced. But the thing is that you're not, again, you're not accounting for the amount of work difference, right? Like, for instance, if you take sample number 1 and sample number 4, it is 10 times the amount of work for sure, right? The selling 100 items, all right, listing 100 items is the execution part of the business. How much profit per item is dependent upon the sourcing part of the business. So it is a teeter-totter of the execution and the sourcing, correct? So when you look at this, for sure, you have a metric on what the execution is. So sell 10 items at $100 profit, or back to number 1, sell 100 items at $10 profit. So 100% for sure, right? That it is 10 times more work on the execution side in selling 100 items than selling 10 items. Because, okay, when it comes to number 4, right? The question is, if you had to source 10 items of $100 profit, okay, is that job 10 times harder to source than $110 items? Okay, you might find it twice as hard, 3 times as hard, 4 times as hard. Even if you find it 8 times harder, it's still not 10 times harder on the execution side. So one still may be worth the other. It is an anecdotal experience of how you source stuff. So it's still very, very hard to say. The question is, how easily can you source an item of that kind of, you know, caliber, of that kind of profit? Then we could talk about the amount of work. But the way this is cut up right now kind of ignores the work that's put into how many listings that you have to do. Think about it. On a smaller scale, if I had to make a 50-50 cake, I just slice once. If I had to do quarters, I would slice 2 times. Slicing once and slicing 2 times is twice the amount of work. This is exactly the same idea. So this is, in my mind, bordering between like elementary and Captain Obvious.
So if you want to break down the numbers, the monthly goal should be have the 50 items sold. The daily sales goal should be 1.7 items. So you're selling even less items but you're making $20 profit. So you're going to get to that $1,000 easier because you're selling less items. Your listing goal is 4 items per day. So you only have to source 4 items that are making $28 profit a day as well. So however you have to source these items, maybe you source them all on one day, maybe you source several times a week. You have to be able to source at least 4 items that make $20 profit a day to get to that $1,000 a month goal.
The next
Okay, so we're definitely going to crunch the numbers on these, okay? And what I want to do is that I want to come back over here and then we're going to crunch the numbers for sample number 2 and sample number 3. And the reason for that is because doing 100 items at $10 profit is really, really slow, right? Nobody really recommends that. And it's very realistic that you could find things of $20 profit, $50 profit, definitely much harder. $100 profit is, you know, let's not kid ourselves, right? It's one thing to find that $100 profit item every now and then. It's another thing to do it consistently without developing your own product and just getting lucky across your finds, right? So, I mean, you know, by that argument, why don't we just do one item at $1,000, right? So, before we get into it, I just want to show you guys a clip of something real quick of another guru that talks about, you know, moving items and completely glosses over the idea of what do you do about the items that doesn't sell. All right, so I'm just going to catch you guys up to speed on this video real quick. So the cost of goods is going to be at $5, and then you're going to make like your average profit $15, okay? So the simulation over here is if you source 10 items every single day and then you only sold 3 out of the 10.
To illustrate my point, we're going to have their 10 items that they're listing every single day. All of these are getting listed to their store. Because their store is growing, if they're selling 3 a day, they're left with 7 items growth. So that's going to be a $5 buy cost times 7 items every single day.
35.
Means every single day they're spending $35 in store growth. On the flip side, they're selling 3 items a day at $15 profit, which means every single day their store is profiting $45. So what we're going to do is we're going to scope it out a bit more, and we're going to look at what's going on over the course of a whole month of this. So every single day they're spending $35 for store growth, which brings them out to spending just over $1,000 in store growth. They are spending this out of their profits. And if every day they are profiting $45, their profit is just under $1,400 for that month. So they will be paying themselves, taking the $1,350 profit minus the $1,050 to accommodate the growing the store by 7 a day. They're giving themselves a $300 paycheck per month.
Okay, so this is very important, right? It navigates the idea that ultimately what's happening with what she has on the store growth versus the profit. She labels it as store growth. I label it as stuck items, okay, which is more honest exactly what it is. It's not embellished as store growth. That's weird. But the thing is that she still comes out to a positive 300. But that's under the premise that your cost of goods was $5 and your average profit on the item was $15, which means there is a 300% markup on this item. Okay. Ask yourself this: how many items do you know where you could buy for $1 and then sell it at $4 so that you could make $3 the difference? Sure, maybe there are certain things that are very cheap that you could probably buy at like, you know, $2 and maybe sell it at $8 if you're lucky, I guess. It's very, very difficult. It's unlikely for this to happen. But let's just say that there is, right? You would need it to be at this ratio in order to be positive. I guarantee you, had you switched the numbers around right here so that the profit is a little bit lower. So let's say you bought the cost of goods for $5, right? And instead you only had an average profit of 10. Well, selling 3 out of the 7, you would be in the red. You would definitely be in the negatives, okay?
So this is where you find yourself, I list 10 items a day and I'm only paying myself $300 a month.
You're
This
not
is
paying
not
yourself
working out.
$300 a month.
I'm going
This-
to deem these packages that are
This
not
profit
selling.
is way too high.
Who knows if they will sell?
It's
Maybe they will
great if you could
sell
do it,
in a year,
but it's
2
not
years.
realistic to most
Who
resellers.
knows? Let's view them all as anchors. These 3 are selling, the rest are not.
Right.
And it's resulting in a $300 paycheck because you are paying out of your profits just over $1,000 to grow your store to an arbitrary number. So what we're going to look at is what happens when you drop all of this and stop listing it.
Here's where it gets
And
tricky.
only list and sell these 3 items. Let's do the math. We're going to
We don't have to do the math. We already know that it's going to be positive 1350. The problem is the boxes, right? You're just trying to say that like, well, only 3 out of the 7. How did you know which 3 out of the 10 was going to sell? How did you know which 7 out of the 10 until you listed them? See, this is the problem with exactly what a good item is. A good item isn't a good item until it sells, but you don't know that until after it sells. Now, what do you do with the 7 stuck items? Watch what she says.
go take a look at my oldest inventory, the ones that's been sitting around on my store for the longest and still hasn't sold. And I'm going to go through it either physically, manually with my hands, or you can go on the computer or your phone and search oldest to newest on your active listings and just research it. Just examine it.
Just research and examine it. Guys, if you are doing reselling, this piece of advice I would find incredibly insulting to you guys, okay? It is under the presumption that you didn't do the research and you just didn't do a very good listing, when the truth is we all know later on when they give advice, it's always like you should have been an expert, you should have done your research, you should have picked good items, you should have did the STR, right? But when you're first getting into it, they tell you, just go ahead, just start. Don't worry about it. You'll learn as you go along. And then you find out, okay, what happens? What do I do with the stuck items? And they tell you, list faster, just get faster at it. Just put them up. But there's no way of listing fast without sacrificing precision, right? Like if you saw an artist do his thing and you told him just go faster, it's not going to be the same quality. That applies to everything. So what are you supposed to do here?
Ask yourself, why hasn't this sold yet? And think of as many possible reasons as to why this hasn't sold. Some reasons could be, simply not a lot of people want this, or it's a very flooded market and hardly any buyers want it, but there's a lot of inventory, so the supply and demand just isn't there. It could be
So
that
you
it's
didn't do your
in a
research.
completely wrong category on eBay and nobody
You put
would
it
have
in the
ever
wrong
found it.
category.
It could have a better title. You have to have good titles to
You didn't
rank
do a good
higher
title.
in the search results. So maybe you can improve that. Maybe improve your picture quality. Buyers like to have as much information as they possibly can about the product before purchasing.
So that would suggest that people are just willy-nilly throwing listings up. Like everybody's just, not very bright, not really doing the titles, probably bad photos, probably. This is what I mean. It's kind of insulting, this kind of advice. Like when you come back to it and then say, well, maybe you didn't do this, maybe you didn't do that. That's not the reason why. It's because ultimately at the end of the day, we all know the truth. The truth is that these are all trial and error items, all of them. Okay. It's not like I don't do trial and errors myself. The difference is that when you're doing a proper business, all right, there is risk mitigation, meaning that when we try an item, we try with the intention of doing it over and over again. We don't do one-off items. If we go anywhere, it doesn't matter how good the item is, right? If you only have one copy of it, not very interested. At best, I'll buy one copy of you and throw it to my factory and see if I can reproduce it. That's the difference, right? Because without more to back it up, now why did I put all this initial footwork in to begin with? So to do all these, one-off boxes and these shelves behind her is just absolutely crazy. You sold one, the energy and the time that you put into taking the photos is just gone with it. The metadata is gone with it. The click-through rate, everything is just gone. Why would you do something like this? You would definitely see if you could replenish constantly if you found a winner. The huge difference here is not about doing good items, but rather doing proven items. Items that have proven itself over and over, that in the past 30 days, they've sold 200 times. If they sold 200 times in 30 days, pretty sure they're going to sell at least another 100 times the next month, right?
And pictures can do that for them. Or it could simply just be that it's priced too high for what it is. So it's always good to go back and do more research on that item to see actually, is it in demand? Do people actually want this? And for what price now? Chances are you will find that the stuff that's been sitting on your store for the longest just is not as desirable or sought after by most people. If at all, you either have to take it down and try to relist it with a much better title, much better pictures. Chances are, if it's made it all the way to the end and it's been sitting for a long time, people probably really just don't want that item. So I would honestly consider pulling all of those items off of your store completely. Which brings me to my second tip. To pull all of your dead inventory that's not selling off your shelves, out of your boxes, off your eBay store entirely. It's not for sale. And then I would honestly probably do a low maintenance, very cheap garage sale. Just try to recoup some money.
So all the effort that you put into finding this thing, right? Cleaning it up, taking photos, cataloging it, listing it, just to wait, have your money tied up in the cost of goods, take it back down, throw up another yard sale, put up folding tables and chairs, sit around, use up one of your weekends, and then what? You thrift it out again?
You can, but the goal is to not take any of this back. And then everything else that might be remaining after the garage sale or after you throw it up on Facebook Marketplace, whatever, see if anybody else wants it, then I would just donate it at that point. And I know you have to come to grips with it.
That sounds a lot like this, doesn't it?
My sold method is start with quality, optimize your listings, lower the price or liquidate if it doesn't sell, and then discard and throw the item away if it doesn't sell.
The biggest problem with reselling is that the fundamental idea of business is very, very misguided. What is the first rule of doing business? Do you guys know? It's find your buyer. Find your buyer first, right? Do you know who your buyer is? Do you already have a buyer before you even have anything, right? So what does that mean? If it's one thing to have an actual client, right? That's a different type of business. But when it comes to products and stuff, what do you know specifically about what customers are buzzing about right now other than a gut feeling, right? Is your item specifically addressing the pain points and the solutions that people are looking for? See, you could do that with a private item. You could probably do that with a white label item as well. As long as you actually done true market research to see what people are really buzzing about and what they want, and maybe even work with a factory where you could change up something just a little bit, tweak it in a way which is based on reviews that you've read that people wish that they had a version of or something like that, then you would actually be offering an item of value into the marketplace rather than shopping around doing this be on the lookout items and stuff based on anecdotal one-off singular small sample, right, isolated events that people have slight anecdotal evidence of. In our last episode, I talked about how dangerous it is, right, to have the assumption of expertise, because what ended up happening to Damien was that he thought, well, Dyson parts move, and then when he tried it again and it was a different Dyson part, it didn't move. That would be the equivalent of saying to yourself that, mushrooms are edible, and then you quickly find out that it's not always true. So let's come back and let's crunch the numbers on exactly what the reseller brothers were talking about. For the sake of saving time, I'm just going to jump right into the summary first to show you guys what is going on, okay? Well, I said that we are going to work with their example 2 and example 3. So a quick recap of what it was, right, is that example 2 was to tell you to sell 50 items with a $20 profit for $1,000 in 30 days, right? And you're supposed to source it at 4 items every single day, and then you only have to sell, an STR of like 50% or something like that. Okay, let me tell you what's going to happen, right? So let's say you started off with a really, really good item, right? 200% markup. And what that means is this. If we can source an item at $10 and then sell it for $30 so that we make the $20 difference, that would be a 200% markup, because essentially we bought for one and then we sold for three and we kept two. So therefore, what would happen is this, okay? The initial investment that you would have to put into a $10 item 4 times every single day for the next 30 days would come out to $1,200 as your initial buy-in, okay? That's your pay-to-play amount. And then you wouldn't break even until you sold 40 units out of the 120 units that you sourced, okay? Now, in order to actually make $1,000 after you broke even, you would need to sell 74 units out of the 120 units that you have, okay? And if you were able to turn over all 120 units, you would actually make a profit of $2,400 based on $20 profit, okay? But here's the thing that usually happens, right? Let's say it was 1-to-1 ratio. So you bought for $1 and you're getting $1 on the dollar, right? So you buy for $1 and you sell for $2 and you make the difference. So what would that look like? It would look like if the item was $20 profit, then it should cost you $20 to source the item. So if it was $20 to source the item over here, your starting capital now after 30 days would be $2,400. And you have to sell half of everything just to break even, because it's just going for 1-to-1, right? So your profit goal for $1,000 now, okay, is that you need to sell another 25 units on top of the 60. So totaling 85 units of 120 in order to get the $1,000 profit goal. Suddenly 85 units out of 120, 74 units out of 120. It doesn't feel like a 50% STR rate, does it? It feels substantially more than that. Here's where it gets really realistic, okay? If you were to do exactly what happens to most resellers, is that because it's very difficult to offer a lot of value when you're selling other people's items, because you don't have creative control over the item. So you can't alter and change it or make it in different colors or customize it or something to the customer's liking for them to warrant paying you more for it. So usually what ends up happening is that you probably have not as good margins, not as good as what Carrie was talking about, where buying things for $5 and getting $15 on it, okay? So even though those items do exist, it's difficult. It's difficult to find consistently, and flip consistently. So let's not digress too much. So let's do $40, right? So if you did $40 per item so that you could sell it at $60, so that you can make the $20 profit difference, so that you're averaging at 50 cents on the dollar, right? Your starting capital is $4,800. You need to drop $5,000 a month to play this game. Suddenly, the whole argument of it doesn't take a lot of money to start reselling is not exactly true anymore, right? Because you could start with a whole lot less. But this is just a simple model of $20 items to make a profit of only $1,000. At this point, why not just get a job? So again, the break even for this is 80 units out of the 120. And if you were to actually make $1,000 at a 50% markup, okay, you have to sell 97 units out of the 120 units that you sold in the 30 days to make $1,000 in the 30 days. Because remember, if you don't make it within 30 days, your money is just tied up in the goods and your opportunity cost goes up. So number 3 says to sell 20 items with $50 profit in 30 days for $1,000, sourcing at 2 items a day now. So 2 items a day would give us 60 items for the month, right? But if we were to do this with really, really good margins, 200% markup margins, then an example of it would look like if we bought it for $25 and we were able to sell it for $75, making the $50 in between. So what happens is that you would need $1,500 just to play the game, just to sit down at the table. And then you would break even after your first 20 units. So while the reseller brothers told you that, like, once you sell your 20 items, you've made $1,000, I argue that you haven't because you have so much money still tied up in goods. So the profit goal here is to make $1,000 on top, right? In order to do that, from the 20 units, you would need another 14 units, making it 34 units out of the 60 in order to actually make $1,000 based on this profit model, all right? So what if the item was just fair, right? Like 100% markup. So basically, if you want to make $50, you probably have to spend $50, sell it for $100, and make the half. Then $50 over here, it will cost you a $3,000 buy-in in order to do this. You would have to sell 30 units out of the 60 in order to just break even and get your money back. Then your profit goal needs to be another 10 units on top. So 40 out of the 60 units you'd have to sell in order to get this right. Then it's the dreaded 50 cents on the dollar, right? So now we're spending $100 on every single order that we do, right? And then we're going to sell it for $150 and just make the $50 difference. So $100 dumped in over the course of 30 days, 2 items a day. You're talking about a buy-in of $6,000. The break even is going to be at 40 units, and then you'll need 47 units out of the 60 in order to make $1,000 on top of it, right? So when you think of 34 to 60, 40 to 60, 47 to 60, in all 3 of these business models, whether you're making 50 cents on the dollar or $2 to the dollar, this is asking for much more than a 50% STR. Just for show, I'm not going to do all of them. I'm just going to click through these real quick just to show you that I did do the math for every single scenario setup of A, B, and C for both the 50 to 20 and 20 to 50. And I'll just go over one of them real quick, like one of the more egregious ones, okay? So a 50% markup over here, 4 items a day, $160 a day, you got to be dumping in $4,800 into the total investment, right? And when you do the math, your first 50 units that you sell, you're actually still negative $1,800. If you're in the other setup over here with also a 50% markup, which is, one of the more average setups, and you did the whole 20 items to $50 profit or whatever, your total investment of $6,000, right? You would be in the hole $3,000 first after your initial, 20 sales. That is the problem. Okay, so I actually had to walk away and come back and shoot the conclusion another day because I was getting too emotionally charged critiquing the advice on these videos, right? I'm totally aware we're supposed to be analyzing the advice and not the advisors. However, when you position yourself as an educator on YouTube, then there is kind of like a code of ethics that you need to be responsible for. And you can see that the information given in both videos are oversimplifications, right? Because they're very incomplete with how many other things that they're leaving out. It seems very motivational and empowering that you can do this. And definitely, I feel the same way. I feel as if anybody can get into business and do something successful and carve out a lucrative lane for themselves, but not when you're giving out such incomplete information framed this way. Because the question always comes back to, what do you do with the leftover goods that you didn't sell? I already know what the pushback of this is going to be. You're going to say, well, those items would sell eventually. There's a lot of issues with items that sell eventually, because within the same spectrum, you could also push back that, okay, those items might sell. You say, okay, those items might sell eventually, but what if they didn't? And what if you didn't make the 50% STR? What if you don't make the 30 days? You have money tied up in goods and you're not currently making sales in order to pay your bills. So what happens? You need to dump out more money from your own savings to find something that sells, because we don't know what sells until it sells. So when you come across this type of information telling you to, you could do how much business with how much amount of sales, I deeply encourage you guys to run the simulation yourself. You could go back to my screens, pull up exactly the type of math that I did, and then plug in numbers that seem more realistic to yourself and the way you're currently doing business right now to really, see the example for what it is and what happens when you just sell, the X amount that they're talking about. I argue that depending on your margins, this could easily put people in the red. You're not just not making money, you're losing money. And the issue and the simulations where you could be making money, you're really not making $1,000 a month on that, okay? Plus, not to mention how much money you actually needed to dump in initially just to play the game. Anyways, guys, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed that. And if you learned something, please consider subscribing to the channel. As always, I believe that great ideas should be spread and other ideas probably should be debated. All right, take care, everyone. See you in the next.